This is Conspirinormal.
I watched Corpse last night.
Yeah. So that very different scenario there with that film. But yeah, cool. So how either bored or disturbed were you at the end? That's usually one of the two reactions.
Well, I've often had that, thing where I've watched a film and I've always wanted to be like, what drugs were the director on?
Right.
And now I can finally ask that question.
You totally can. You totally can. Believe it or not, not none. Well, I don't know. Beyond the caffeine's a drug, nicotine's a drug. It's probably some marijuana in there somewhere. But no, I was fairly like normal in terms of me. That was a lot of the stuff that came out of that was I can save this for the talk or whatever. I can say it twice. It's a lot of that actually came out of two things, like both my experimental film background, because that's kind of like quote unquote what I was trained in and like who I studied with, the dudes that I studied with, and that intersecting with using like basically trying to adopt occult practices in order to make the film, which was not, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio. It was a pretty weird thing. And I can talk, happy to talk about that. But yeah, it was like, I basically started using, I started trying to adopt like, not ceremonial magic, not like, daggers and robes or anything like that. But I'd say stuff more from like, probably more from like a chaos magic or like, a general sort of adopted Western practices from Western esotericism. And then from my sort of weird secret upbringing in a Sufi cult, that I kind of like tried to bring stuff together to try it out for the first time with that film. So yeah, that's the result you get, is this incredibly psychedelic piece.
Yeah, that's interesting. We just interviewed a couple weeks ago Carl Abrahamson and talked to him, and he kind of had some similar thoughts about his artistic and filmmaking processes.
Oh, yeah. That's great. I'm psyched to hear that then. That's very cool. Yeah, I think that there are some people that are, beyond the general, like talking about Kenneth Anger or anything like that. I think there are more and more people who are starting to think about, there have been for a long time thinking about this in terms of art in general, but I think more specifically like filmmaking, which is just such it's such a specific like practice within, the subset of creativity. But I think more and more people are trying to find ways to kind of get out of that, or at least, I don't know, try to find ways to break out of the narrative structure. At least that's the way I think about it, at least, is that in a lot of ways, I think most people, not everybody, I don't want to generalize, I think most people are pretty sophisticated when it comes to visual language, but I do think that there's this, in a different way than you might say about like music or film, about music or literature, that film is really relegated to sort of this narrative space. And don't get me wrong, I think that like narrative, they kind of go hand in hand in the same way that, literature goes hand in hand to some degree with narrative. But there are like, I think people are, when they think of films, they're really thinking of a story, whereas there's a lot more you can do with a moving image. And, that's of course me coming from like my education and background and sort of my particular feelings about it. But I think it's still kind of untapped in terms of, what it can be used for, or maybe it's not untapped because honestly we're being severely mind controlled through moving image media by so that's not the case at all.
Well, it seems to be a continuation of that kind of Wagnerian ultimate art form that combines audio and visual and time and space and everything into one,
right?
And of course, like the more the people who more warn against the occult definitely like to point that out too.
Oh, completely. Yeah. Well, it reminds me you're talking about it in terms of having these different like sort of the different artistic currents or disciplines. There's something that I don't know if you're familiar with Maya Deren. You probably are. Maybe, I don't know. She's a filmmaker. She was a filmmaker in like the 50s and 60s, and she's very cool in that she was sort of one of the first, not one of the first, but at least in terms of like 20th century filmmaking, she really incorporated the occult, even though it was not explicit. A lot of she was really into Haitian voodoo and symbolist poetry and sort of interesting stuff like Gestalt psychology. But she was making these films up until like she died in the early 60s. And they're essentially these sort of like proto, not proto. They're still. I mean, I'm a film professor, so I teach them in my class, and it's sort of this thing that many people who know about film history know about Maya Deren's work. Her most famous film is Meshes of the Afternoon, which is this sort of surrealist film she made in the early 40s. But yeah, she did a lot of her films. Used film as a particular medium in order to reenact these. She was a dancer, these sort of performances. So I think sort of in a similar way that if anybody knows the work that Alkistis from Scarlet Imprint does of incorporating like movement into sort of an occult practice, that was something that Maya Deren was doing. And she has this really important essay that I always hand out to my students, which is about it's called The Creative Use of Reality. And she's writing this in the 40s, and she's talking about is exactly what you said, how film has this she specifically talks about it in terms of art, the art disciplines at the time. So she's it has the movement that comes from dance, it has the performative nature of theater, it's got the you're using like space and set design, so it's got like that sort of sculptural element, and then it's got sound and all these things, and how it's really sort of this philosophical treatise on the specialness of film. And I mean I agree with you. I don't think that's gone away, and I think the more and more we see even things like virtual augmented reality not catch on in the way that people think they are, like it's going to replace the cinematic experience. I think that keeps on, to me at least, proving that it's not. It's like it's still a medium that we haven't squeezed the life out of it, as a lot of hot takes will say.
Well, you see, I think we've already started. We've done our organic start.
Cool.
So
yeah,
Tim Binnall is here.
I saw Tim Binnall.
What's going on, guys?
How you doing, Tim? I haven't seen you since the crypto conference last year. Yeah.
I know.
How you hanging in?
The success of the movie since it's been released. I'm so happy people are getting the chance to see it now.
In no small part to you. You'll be the star of our next film. I kid you not. We'll talk about
That's
that later.
what I've been hearing. I look forward to it. I'm definitely down. I'd like to stretch my wings out on in the next movie, so it'll be fun.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, man. I mean, that is
from fry cook to leading role.
Yeah.
So
There you go.
Go ahead, Adam.
Well, introduce who we got here. So, of course, welcome to Conspirinormal. We've already gotten started. And we've got Chris Ernst on the line. And Chris has directed and produced a film called The Hill and the Hole. And we also have someone that is actually in the movie and is a good friend of ours, Tim Binnall. So welcome to Conspirinormal, guys.
Hey, what's going on, guys?
Hello, thank you. Sorry, I might have had some dogs barking in the background there. They're gone now.
Oh, no problem. No problem. We have dogs bark in the background a lot on this show, so right. It's not a big deal. A couple episodes ago, we had to stop the show because somebody's dog went crazy. so it is what it is. But so Chris, welcome to Conspirinormal. It's your first time here.
Much. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. I'm a long-time listener, so it's an honor to be now speaking to you, gentlemen.
Yeah, well,
awesome.
Thank you. An equal honor to be speaking to you as well. We really, we both really enjoyed the movie.
That's awesome.
It's this interesting little weird movie called The Hill and the Hole, as we described later or earlier. And I guess really, Chris, we'll kind of just start with kind of like the idea for this movie. Like what what kind of inspired you to make it?
That's well. First thing I should shout out to my my co-creator Bill Darman, who's really without him this wouldn't exist, because he and I sort of do things together as a duo. Yeah, it's a independent feature that I made with Bill. We were both directors. Bill wrote it, and I was the cinematographer for it. It is based on a short story by Fritz Leiber, who, for any of you don't know who Fritz Leiber is, he's a kind of amazing pulp writer that his most famous piece is probably the Sword and Sorcery series, Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. And he's the guy who came up with the term Sword and Sorcery. So he was a kind of prolific pulp writer. Say that 5 times fast. Prolific pulp writer. This is one of his really short stories, so it's like only a few pages long. You can find it online. Bill and I wanted to do a story, wanted to do a film that kind of encompassed all of our interests in this like melting pot way that have to do with paranormal, occult, American weirdness, the Southwest, cinematic tropes of the supernatural. And Bill had been, Bill Darman and our friend Kyle Haraldson and Ryan Darman, Bill's brother, had done this web series called Mandate 33 several years ago, where it was essentially like a road trip that was using Jim Brandon's Weird America and Rebirth of Pan as like road maps for places that they were going around America. And you can still find it if you go to Mandate 33 on YouTube. You can find the webisodes, or these short little ones. And
they were doing it before Hellier.
They were doing it before Hellier, yes, indeed. They were doing it before Hellier, though. I think it was less of a personal, like, synchromystic journey for them, or at least there were less things that were happening to them. Though I don't think they were trying to instigate them. The guy Kyle is he's a hardcore skeptic, and I think he would have like negated most things. But that was the model that they had for it. Anyway, so yeah, they're doing this, and so through that, Bill had kind of he'd become friends with like Go Rightly, and he knew Greg Bishop and Lauren Coleman and stuff like that. And so we were like, all right, well, let's just try to do this. We had this short story that we got the rights to from the Leiber estate. Bill was like, I'm just going to call up Go Rightly, see if he wants to be in this. I started helping in terms of doing the film production. Bill was writing it, and it was kind of a whirlwind. Like, we decided to do it like the spring of 2016, shot it in the summer of 2016, and we've been slowly putting it out since then and finishing it and trying to do finishing funds and stuff. But it's out now, and it's, I think, for anybody that's at least I don't know if I ever have the right sort of take on my films, but I always describe it to people, this film at least, as being sort of like, if Jim Jarmusch and David Lynch tried to do like an 80s horror movie or something like that.
Right.
So it's got like this kind of, it's quirky, it's small, it's an indie film. You got some sort of the performances, are like, it's I don't want to say campy, but it's got kind of a quirky feel to it. And I know everybody, hate the word quirky, but it's a little quirky. It's weird. We tried to totally embrace the weird. The film we shot all on location in New Mexico. We were driving all around. We shot a little bit of it in Massachusetts too, which is where Mr. Binnall showed up. We had some pickups there. But yeah, most of it was like kind of another road trip where we were driving all around New Mexico, and really kind of letting the land become the backdrop and the set for it. And it was great. I mean, at least in terms of the experience, it was a whirlwind. And if next time you speak to Go Rightly, you can ask him what his experience was like on it. He was totally cool with it. I think some of the actors were like, "What is this?" It's kind of crazy punk rock filmmaking. But yeah, that was so it's I think for anybody that is interested in sort of like, cult films, genre stuff, genre horror, particularly anybody that, I think anybody that listens to this to this show definitely will enjoy it. And I think beyond that though, we have had some pretty good responses from like horror buffs and people who are like really steeped in kind of like horror films, sci-fi, fantasy films from like 70s, 80s, and 90s, which is really what we sort of grew up on too. Mm-hmm. And in many ways it incorporates a lot of that vibe. But yeah, I'd say to anybody listening, check it out. It's on Amazon. It's on Prime for free if you've got a Prime subscription, and then cheap rental if you want to rent it. And I think it's going to be there for at least another few months. But if film festivals start happening again, it's a possibility we might have to pull it for a short amount of time.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So, Tim, who do you play in this film?
I play Adam's assistant, I guess you could say, or his fry cook. I play a fried dough cook in the movie. It was pretty cool. It was a lot of fun. It was an interesting experience. You don't realize how much work goes into making a movie until you've been a part of it. Just for my little scene there, it took us like all night to do.
Yeah.
And because these guys, the crew there that made the movie, they're so professional. Like you think like, oh, you're just gonna film it once. It's like, no, we did it from like 8 different angles. It was a really eye-opening experience that I enjoyed quite a bit. So, and it's you gain a lot of respect for the people that make the movie, the people who are in the movie, because you got to keep you got to do the scene over and over and over again, for the different angles and everything. So it is it's tiring, but also it's very like start and stop. It's a really interesting experience. I would love to do it again because just the one time alone was like really, it was pretty awesome. And I was like, this is a really cool experience. And it was
for real, Tim. Like I've been talking to Bill, and I was, sort of joking with Adam before the show. But if we ever get to the point where we can do things with each other again physically, when we start making films again, that and the whole funding a film thing. No, we're like, oh, it should be like a Kolchak type thing, like Night Stalker, and you should totally be wearing like your MC uniform. And if I used to have, it died last year, but I used to have a 77 Crown Vic that would have been the best prop car for this. I'm kicking myself that thing died. So yeah, we get the funds together, you'll be getting the call. It'll be great. I'm psyched for it.
I would definitely be down for that.
I'm picturing Binnall with like a
trench coat
with a cross, kind of like what Red Pill Junkie.
Yeah,
totally. Kind of like that idea.
Yeah. We have to get Go Rightly's got to be the heavy too. He's got to be the bad guy. Always. The
the hood.
Right.
Yeah.
Have you got an IMDb entry now, Tim?
I think I might, but I'm not sure.
He should. If we did our work, I think he should.
I'll look it up. I'll check it out. Yeah, I didn't even like look for that kind of thing. But yeah, it's cool. What I really enjoy a lot about it too, which Chris might be able to speak to, is because I only got like a taste of it. This is part of why I was like, I'd like to do more of this, because there was really, and I mean this not like, there was like, I was gonna say like a traveling circus, but it was more like a rock band kind of feel, where it was just like you could tell the gang had been all together on this journey, the folks making the movie. I just came for the day, so I was just kind of like meeting people, or the night, and was meeting people and everything. But like the more I kind of watched them, and Chris might be able to enlighten me because I couldn't. My memory's foggy. It was like 3 years ago, and I don't quite recall. But a couple of the guys had just driven literally across the country.
Oh yeah. They had. It was. We had finished shooting in northern New Mexico, and we had to make it in order to get this fried dough truck in Massachusetts that we were shooting in. And so some of us flew, but then some of us had to actually drive the gear back because it wasn't gear we rented in New Mexico. It was gear that we had here. So it was Bill and our friend Billy, who's this probably the closest thing to like a legit cowboy that you will ever meet. They drove, I want to say, in like 36 hours from New Mexico to Massachusetts.
Yeah,
because I guess if it is in New Mexico, it'd probably be fried bread or Navajo tacos, huh?
Right. Yeah. Well, it was, from a filmmaking standpoint, and I really should, I shouldn't admit this, seeing as how I am a film professor by trade. The production, in terms of how we set it up, it was not the smartest production. It was really kind of like, as you do with, independent productions of any kind, music, film, whatever. We just, you're calling in all the favors you can. And it turned out that it was cheaper to do several of these sort of like big shoots near where we had things we could get for free. So like if you're watching the, obviously, so if you're watching the film, like the baseball scene, it's actually two different places. It's one place. And if you watch it, you can kind of be like, oh, I kind of see that. It's shot, we had one baseball diamond that we could get just for like the wide shot where there's this really long conversation scene with Go Rightly looking over the baseball diamond, and then all the close-ups are done where we could get a little league team for free, which was in Massachusetts. We had to like cut back and forth between those. And the fried dough truck is in the same space there, and we were able to get one for free. So the magic of filmmaking, cutting between different locations.
Did they actually have the fryers going?
Oh yeah,
we did. Yeah, we did have the fryer going. I think we did.
No, you totally did. You fried up some good bread. I remember our production designer commented on how you and Billy, the other guy that was Garotti's assistant, they were like, she was like, you guys fried up some good stuff.
You didn't skimp on the powdered sugar.
No. But to sort of to go back a little bit to what I was saying in a sense, it was like it was sort of had this like traveling band feel to it that I was like, I want to be a part of this gang that's been working together, and checking in and out of hotels and sort of just sleeping in cars and driving across country in a day and a half and all that. It was like there was a passion there that was infectious, and just being around it for like one day, I was like, oh my God, this is they were all exhausted, but it was like that euphoric exhaustion, and it was like I want to tap into that, man. I want to like push, see how far I can push it, dude. This is like awesome. I was looking at them in this euphoric state of exhaustion, and I was genuinely like envious. Where I was like, I want to be a part of that.
I was wondering as I was watching it, because I knew it was primarily filmed in New Mexico. And then I was thinking, did Binnall get to go to New Mexico? Like, I didn't know what was going on. But you kind of have to do what you have to do. And having just organized a conference not that long ago, I could kind of relate to that.
Oh, totally. It's the same, that's really all like producing a film is at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I mean, not like, the directing, that's a whole different, but producing, it's pulling the same stuff together. Like that's why, I always encourage people that are good at like organizing stuff to become film producers, because there are a lot of us, like me at least, I end up doing it, but I'm kind of an introvert, and I'd much rather be just like behind the camera, not worrying about all the other stuff that has to be done. Like I worry about, paying my bills at home enough. I don't want to have to worry about the rest of that stuff. So it's, being a film producer, we need more of you in the world, because you're amazing people if you can do that.
Yeah, you just kind of pull it all together. I wanted to ask you, Chris, though, about like what the mythology that kind of like this is based in.
Yeah.
And then like the story itself, Was there a lot of elements that you pulled from the story? Because I understand it's not that long of a story.
Sure. Yeah. So the story itself, it's essentially about a Bureau of Land Management employee. It's set, I want to say, during might have been set during the Depression or Dust Bowl, but it's essentially about this BLM employee who goes to a farm, and there's a hill that is reading out as being a hole, and he sort of has this ghostly encounter with the spooky encounter with the girl and the landowner there, and she talks to him about these entities that sort of live there and that they try to pull you in, and it's essentially a ghost story. And so we took that, which if you watch the film, it's sort of the same thing. Bureau of Land Management guy ends up on this farm. This creepy little girl. He has an altercation with the landowner. And so that's the essential story. And so when we were trying to put in all of this other stuff in there, which was really like a hodgepodge of local lore and sort of general conspiracy and occult mythology tropes and stuff like that, we really didn't think about trying to do it in any authentic way. So we're not even though there is for anybody that doesn't know, there's a really huge mythology, and there's a lot of stuff written about this mound culture and these mounds that exist all over the United States. And there are other, mound structures that exist elsewhere in the world, earthworks. Most of these are attributed to Native American tribes, but essentially most of the Native American tribes who were, living in the areas where some of these mounds are, like Serpent Mound in Ohio being one of the most famous ones, they say, we don't know where these came from. They were here before, so they either were being reappropriated and reused by the people that were living there, or they came from somebody earlier. To talk about the mound culture, the mound builders, is a name that's sort of bandied around, like archaeological or, ancient archaeological discussions, but nobody really knows who they are. So a lot of the stuff that is wrapped up in this mythology is, it intersects with other things like giant skeletons being found in some of these mounds, allegedly. Ancient cultures, pre, what was the name of what's the name of the Clovis? Is it Clovis? Like pre-Clovis?
Pre-Clovis.
Yeah, pre-Clovis. So there's all the stuff that's attached to the mound culture. The Kenseta, is that what it is? The red-headed cannibal tribes. I'm mispronouncing the name of it. But this is like another legend, from the Southwest and Central America about these, tribes of red-headed, cannibal humanoids that allegedly some tribes had battles with or fought. There are these legends that come through this. So we took all that stuff, but then we also took this kind of I would say a lot of this has to do with Golightly's influence too. A lot of kind of kooky conspiracy culture. So like Masonic, riffing on like Masonic secret societies, not to give too much away in spoilers, but there's this sort of secret society that's part of the plot in the film that we added there. And so things like that, too. So we didn't want to limit ourselves to one particular thing. It was kind of like to throw it all in there to get the whiff, the mouthfeel of, general, of the, whatever this confluence of Fortean. I mean, Bill and I are very much, consider our interests. We would label it to be Fortean, and that we are very much interested in, everything without judgment on what it may or may not be, and how it may be, how these things may be connected to one another. But it's all fair game as far as we're concerned, and probably all connected. Yeah.
It all ties kind of into this carnivalesque, weird Americana, all these different mythos together.
Absolutely.
And then with that southwestern landscape too, it just really creates this really mysterious atmosphere. And I really dug it, man. I had a little personal screening in my basement with my projector and had some popcorn and colas with my girlfriend, and we watched it and really enjoyed it. It just has, especially for listeners of Conspirinormal or anyone into all this stuff, it has so much of it that you'll recognize. But at the same time, even if someone isn't as like steeped in all this stuff as us, they'll still really enjoy it because it's a good film.
Yeah. You know, we actually had we were just on a podcast talking. There's this these folks that are archaeologists that do this like horror film podcast, and man, we were terrified when they said they were going to review this film, because we're like, this is the worst, most like inaccurate, like we didn't even think about this from like a legitimate arc. Either that or they're gonna you know, come at us and be like, oh, what, you guys like Graham Hancock or whatever it is. And they were awesome. They were like the greatest, and they actually said they didn't pick it apart. I mean, they loved it in terms of it, you know, they liked it as a movie, as a horror movie, and they just sort of approached it as that. But even the archaeological stamp, even the points of archaeology, I could just imagine the same thing, like, you know, like when a doctor watches, you know, ER, they're like, you don't do that, you know, that kind of thing.
Well, all that there's that mound builder mythos is so ripe for things like this, the prima materia for fiction, because it's really interesting, all the different myths. You have a giant skeleton in the movie, you know, that's part of like the whole vast Smithsonian cover-up idea, and you know, all these kind of myths. It's really great for fiction, I could see. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, you know, for me at least, as somebody who's, since I was a little kid, been interested in all of this stuff. I'm one of those time life kids, I like to call, or at least I have this theory that like there's a whole, you know, slew of us that in the 80s we read the Time Life series on
Mysteries of the Unknown.
Yeah, Mysteries of the Unknown. I've
got them all right here, right in view.
God, they were the best.
You got the whole set.
Yeah, I got the whole set.
Oh, that's awesome, man. Yeah. And so I think there's this whole like set of us that has that. That's sort of like our touchstone for the strange, the weird, or at least that started things.
Well, the mounds. Like Sergio was saying, like the mound stuff, that's becoming, I think, more and more recognized lately, especially with guys like Graham Hancock's America Before book, and where he talks about the mounds and the civilizations that were here before. But that was a huge thing in the like the 19th century, and we've kind of discovered that like even here around Tennessee, our area is just covered in them.
Yeah.
Well, it has a deep, dark history. And someone from our area in Middle Tennessee here, Judge John Haywood, was one of the people really responsible for propagating a lot of these kind of British Israelism and almost Mormon-like myths. And then also he's probably one of the number one reasons why the giants and pygmy mummy myths really got spread.
Yeah. Well, a lot of that too. I mean, I think I mentioned this when we were talking on Where Did the Road Go. But one of the things that we, you know, wanted to make sure of, and I think it's important to bring up when you're talking about any of this, is the representation of sort of native or indigenous cultures when it comes to the mounds and stuff like this, essentially in the way that like you don't want everything to be like buried on an Indian burial ground thing, you know, which I think is just, there's a little bit more, I don't know, sophistication or, you know, a more awareness of the actuality of, you know, what we know about history and how these different cultures sort of existed. And there was one thing we didn't want. We wanted to, it was, you know, we had a couple conversations. We were wondering, at least I think I remember, maybe I had them with myself, about, you know, how we don't want this to be represented as like, you know, Indian burial, Indian ghosts coming back or something like that, which is just, you know, to me just doesn't feel kind of quite right. But as part of that was, you know, and I think it made it very easy for us to lean into this idea of, you know, these essentially like the creatures we created are
more otherworldly,
kind of goofy. They're more other. I mean, we were thinking of like, you know, Cyclops. They're like weird sort of like Cyclops I mean, essentially, I was thinking of Ray Harryhausen. We were putting them together and like the Sinbad skeletons and stuff like that. So
some kind of weird cosmic alchemy thing, like the Brandon ideas.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that when one is looking at sort of the mound culture stuff, you have to be careful in terms of the stuff that you're reading, like parsing out what is essentially like colonialist BS versus what's actually happening. But it is ripe for fiction, and also I think for continued, as you said, as Graham Hancock is doing, but in particular the mounds. These are mysteries that still exist, and it's they're right in our backyard, and I find that to be pretty fantastic.
Almost literally in my backyard here.
Right.
This whole area around Nashville was literally one giant mass grave, stone box graves.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really great movie. All those different mythos. Anyone who's in this culture will really like it. There's one thing I really want to talk about in it that struck me was this idea of surveyors of being the keepers of these like American secrets.
Yeah.
And that's like, I think, that's one of the biggest nuggets of it. And there's a lot behind it. I want to know what initially kind of, besides the book, what did you guys draw from?
That's all Bill. And he's had this, it's something that, he actually grew up for part of his childhood in, Colorado, outside of Denver, near some very, very weird places that were there. And I think if I remember correctly, it was at that point, or like he had some interaction with the BLM, or there's something that earlier on in his life, like essentially got him interested in these, people that were pretty much tasked to like take care of or not take care of, but kind of be like the Buffy's like Giles, watcher to the like the Southwest and all the weirdness there. Anyway, he was the one that came up with the idea. It seems like it tracks really well, and I'm glad you picked up on that. I would assume you would, because we were thinking about, essentially the fact that, BLM, they are particularly in the Southwest and in the West, maybe not so much these days, but at least, back in sort of during the hot spot, or during the time in which a lot of the historically relevant, big UFO, big weirdness that was going on in the Southwest was happening. The BLM people were, always there. So I think this idea of trying to create sort of like an Indiana Jones, not really Indiana Jones, but more like, the BLM is they're the keepers of the secrets of like geomancy. Well, not geomancy, but that's some of it. Because making maps is can be seen as a magical act in itself. And exactly, yeah.
And with the Brandon stuff, you definitely have the tie-in to the James Shelby Downard stuff with the mystical toponymy and naming of places and all of that. So it's right up my alley, man. I really caught on to that current in it.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah. No, I'm glad. That's totally intentional. And we actually had an idea to try to create an extended universe where the BLM is they're like the good guys, or not good guys, but they're the protagonists that we follow, at least.
Yeah.
Whether or not that'll happen, I don't know. But that would be like, instead of a private investigator, it's the BLM.
Well, they can really use it now.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was another thing too, that when Bill was writing this, he did think about the whole Eamon Bundy thing was happening at the time. And so that was something that was definitely present in his mind with the characters of the rancher and his his cronies. Not that we're representing that at all in a as it actually happened, but that sort of relationship and that current was something we were thinking about too.
Yeah, the rancher and his toadies.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And the mound, the hill, is an actual Indian mound. Is that correct?
It's not. It's an actual mound. It's not it is a geologic not anomaly, but there are very few of them. And it is actually probably about I don't know, 600 miles away from the farm ranch it's a digitally moved. We moved that mound. It's in Colorado, and anybody who drives from like Denver, or basically there's like one highway that goes up and down Colorado north to south, the major highway, and it's right off that in this area it's called the Herfano Butte, and it's a naturally occurring butte that's on this other parcel of land that Ryan, one of our producers, and Bill were doing scouting along with our art director Caitlin, and they saw it as they were driving along the highway, and they're like, "Oh my God, we got to use that thing." So it's an actual. It has, as far as we know, there were no cultures that were involved in doing anything there on it, but it's been around since time immemorial. It's in this really cool area right at the southern part of Colorado, where it's essentially the Rockies meeting the plains there. It's that's a spooky area, man. All that area.
Oh yeah, dude. I'm from Arizona. I got a lot of family history in North New Mexico and Southern Colorado, so that's like my stomping grounds when I was a kid. I'm very familiar. But my understanding is that there isn't really much mound building earthworks until you get to down where Phoenix is now. Right. But there's all kinds of different. I guess there's more of a tendency to build with adobe, so there wasn't as much earthworks around the Chaco Canyon cultures and the Anasazi stuff.
Right. The mound culture is much more in eastern United States.
Yeah. Ohio Valley stuff. Yeah, that's when I was saying, like, we weren't being in any way trying to be accurate, and we don't even say that it's New Mexico. We sort of like it's this. Originally, actually, wanted to do it out in Sonora area. I don't know if you guys have ever been out there, but it's like, I mean, it's crazy. Like, it is one of. Do you remember that film? It was Robin Williams, LL Cool J, Barry Sonnenfeld's Toys. Do you remember that from the 90s?
I remember it, but I don't know if I ever saw it or not.
Okay. Like Toys Come to Life or something? Something along those lines? It was
something like that. It was like, I want to say it was, Toys Come to Life, but there's like... it's like quirky, like Robin Williams is the heir to a toy fortune that the military's gonna use to like build weapons. I don't know.
Okay, I remember now.
Anyway, there's a whole series of like shots that are done in these hills, and some of them are the ones that were out in Sonora, and it's this really weird artificial. It looks like Teletubby World is what it looks like in many ways. And we were out there. Well, actually, the idea originally we were going to do it there is because of the whole airships thing, and Bill was researching some stuff about the NIMSA airship stuff out there.
That from Walter Bosley stuff?
Walter Bosley. Actually, we were out there more recently with Olav Phillips doing some interviews for something that might come out at some point where we're talking about that. It's it's not Walter's in particular. There's another line that we were kind of looking at, which has to do with which has to do with Del Shao, who's the guy who wrote the book, but his involvement with a secret society out there called the Clampers, which are kind of like the Odd Fellows.
I haven't heard this part. That's
this is shouldn't probably say too much. Bill will smack me because we're still in the middle of looking into it.
Swore to a blood oath.
Yeah, right. No, I think it's okay. I think we talked about this on the last when we were on Where Did the Road Go? But essentially there's Charles Delshaw, who was the guy, not to go too far off topic, but Charles Delshaw, the guy who wrote the book that, who wrote the material that ended up sort of uncovering the whole, NIMSA thing. And, he was the one that was, he was the one that the name that you hear about his folio and stuff. Anyway, he was in Sonora, which is like an old mining town. And there is there's a society there. I mean, I don't know if they call themselves secret. They're like kind of like an Odd Fellows, but they're called the Clampers. And he was a Clamper, and they're big tricksters. There is a little bit further away, more towards like San Francisco, Walnut Creek area. There's this clamper sort of monument that shows like an airship. And anyway, we're interested to see if there is a connection between the Clamper Society and sort of the whole airship mystery. There.
Well, that's another current in the movie that I really liked was I guess a lot of the popular culture is more focused on secret societies as some kind of global conspiracy, but secret societies in small towns is what's really interesting to me, and especially early 20th century. I mean, I think you really did have a lot of small towns under total control of secret societies in America, especially in the West, the South, and the West.
Yeah, I think this was like that was definitely something that we were thinking about, and the Clampers was very much that. It's a weird like. They're kind of like a Yosemite, like they're trying to put out this sort of like Yosemite Sam type vibe, which is, and they're like, if you look up Clampers, it'll officially be called like a drinking club. But there's all this weird stuff out there. Like we started to talk to the people in Sonora, and we were like, "Oh, can you tell us about the Clampers?" And people like shut up and be like, "Oh, you don't want to go there." Which is like,
did they clamp up?
They clamped up, exactly. And you can't really tell if it's like if it's they don't want you to like mess with the good old boys that kind of run the town, or if it's something else, And so I'm not quite sure. And I would say that I'm a healthy skeptic in the same way that I think anybody, or at least the way like Cutchin would describe being a skeptic. To me in the beginning, I was like, oh, it's just drinking buddies, just, guys, it's, there's nothing to it. But the more and more we sort of like were looking into it, there was some weird stuff. We went into this Clamper cemetery with Olaf, and he ended up talking to this old dude who was like in the corner. And I guess like the old dude was opening up to him about all these weird like connections that the Clampers had and stuff like that. Whether or not it was true, I'm not sure, but I think there is something interesting there. So that's something we were working on. And just to finish up my earlier thought, originally we were thinking about shooting it in Sonora, ended up in New Mexico, just because we had our art director had a bunch of places, she's from there, that we could use to shoot. But the geography is not supposed to be real geography. We're sort of in a fictional weird America.
Yeah, and the Southwest is great for that. So, how did you go about scouting? Like, how did you find all these locations? I know you said Bill found that hill.
Yeah.
But how did the other locations? How did you come about all that?
So it was during the spring. So I was still teaching, so I wasn't able to go out to do any of the actual physical location scouting. So Bill, our producer Ryan, and our art director Caitlin, they they just did a trip out there. They drove around. Caitlin lived at that point in New Santa Fe, so they kind of used that as a home base. But we shot all over the place, and that was actually probably one of the worst things about the shoot, is how far the locations were away from each other, and how much doing a company move where we had to like move our entire production crew from one place to another, that really ate up a lot more time than we thought we were going to have. So we ended up Bill and Ryan and Caitlin, they basically drove through Santa Fe. She lived there. Like, Caitlin has lived in New Mexico for a lot of her life, and Bill had done a lot of, he lived there earlier in Colorado, and they did a lot of traveling. And so anyway, they knew the place, the area a little bit, but essentially it was road tripping is what they did. They took a week and they road tripped all around to try to find these places, which is a big part of what like Bill was doing. Bill and Ryan were doing with Mandate, and it's kind of how we I've sort of a history of doing that too. I did a film way back in the day that was the first film I was a director of photography for, about the Bosnian pyramids, which I can talk about in a sec if you want. But so they looked around there sort of as part of a road trip, and they basically ended up finding all these cool places that were pretty far away from each other. So we shot in Vallecitos, which is like in the middle of nowhere, kind of in the basically it's in the desert there, in the right smack in the middle of New Mexico. Then we had to drive to Santa Fe to do, which was about 100 something miles to do the shoot at the ballpark. And then the rest of the stuff we actually did mainly around this northern New Mexico town called Raton, which is right below the border with Colorado. And it's a fantastic town. They're like the awesomest people there. We went back to shoot a biker rally that they have there every year for the town, and they're the sweetest people. We love the town of Raton, and they really hooked us up. So we ended up shooting a lot of getting a lot of locations through there. Like we got a cop to be in it through there and stuff like that. So it really was like boots on the ground work, I think, that ended up yielding it. We really went into this with the idea that, we're doing a micro budget film and we're using this, production design methodology of, letting just finding turnkey locations, so letting the state and its natural beauty and what it looks like essentially dictate it. So it was just like about a week of them driving around, sending me pictures, me commenting on it. It didn't work out great in the end because we had so much travel, at least for our constitution, but it ended up looking great. So, that's kind of the way that we always shoot stuff. Like I've always been, I like to kind of wander around the area and kind of get a feel for it and figure out places to shoot rather than like having a predetermined idea of what something's going to look like. Well, I know that sometimes is a good idea and you have to do it in terms of pre-visualizing for filmmaking. Trying to have a more of like feeling it out, a more of a Herzog style, approach to getting to the truth of the location. It was very bad Herzog, but
yeah, you guys really do a good job of capturing that sense of place that really adds to the atmosphere and really makes the movie.
Yeah.
Well, what I wanted to ask about getting Lauren Coleman kind of involved. I mean, he's there. He's in the credits. Was that kind of like a little kind of homage to his kind of work in like Synchromysticism in a way?
Oh, completely. I mean, seeing as how Lauren, Lauren knew about this project from the beginning. And I think we were trying to get him involved in some way earlier on, but there was some other thing that he was doing. We have a pretty good relationship, particularly Bill with Lauren, and they've, Bill, in using his filmmaking capabilities, has helped out Lauren a lot with the Crypto Museum and stuff like that. So he's a real big booster and supporter of us, and we really couldn't be happier about that because he's such a fantastic guy and a hero of ours. So yeah, we essentially the only way we could get him to be in the film is if we went to the museum and shot him there, which I totally understand because the guy's got stuff to do. So we did that. We went up there and we really didn't know where it would fit, but we just kind of wanted it to have something, because he'd been, Lauren I think he's the reason why we ended up meeting Go Rightly, and he's introduced us to some other people. He hooked us up with Jerome Clark, and we went and did a pretty long interview with him last summer that we haven't used for anything yet, but we will be doing something with it soon. So he's been a big supporter of Bright Rectangle Films and all the stuff we've been doing. So yeah, we just wanted to get him in there and in some way, shape, or form. Yeah.
You interviewed, you said Jerome Clark?
Yeah, Jerome Clark. Yeah, Lauren's been helping us. We've been we would like to and this is still in a very embryonic stage, so we haven't really started talking to people about it, but we'd like to do some sort of documentary style, either series or film on essentially on Fortean research. But really where it stands today. So we have, we interviewed Lauren about his identification as a Fortean, and he talked about some pretty cool stuff, including how he used his status as a Fortean for his conscientious objection to the Vietnam War, like rather than being, yeah, it's really cool stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So we interviewed Lauren, we interviewed Go Rightly, and we interviewed Jerry, and we also interviewed Stephanie Quick because we were out in San Francisco and she was there. The idea would be to sort of have people who are like, Lauren or Jerry, who are like the older guard Forteans, people who were approached the subject of, the paranormal, not from the siloed, realms of UFOs or Bigfoot, but really,
right.
In a broad sense. And then to sort of open that up to talk to people that are kind of continuing that tradition these days. So, you guys, Kutchin, Soraya, other people like that approach things from more of a Fortean perspective.
So how did Mr. Binnall get involved with this?
Mr. Binnall got involved in this because of Go Rightly and the fact that we were going to be in Massachusetts, and I think it was me I think maybe Go Rightly was thinking about hooking up with Binnall just to like hang out, and I was like, my God, we should have Binnall in this. Are you kidding me? Binnall of America. So Go Rightly asked Binnall, and Binnall kindly said yes.
Yeah,
and it was like a no-brainer.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it went down. And Adam talked to you guys and got me. I don't know if it was already a role in the movie or what, but luckily, you had me do shit in the movie.
Yeah, no.
I had lines and stuff, which is awesome.
That's right. Yes, no. We specifically made sure that was created for you. I think we had an idea that we wanted to have there be Tiny and have there be an assistant. I don't think even he had a name, but once you agreed, we're like, oh, we gotta give him a real role then. So, yeah, it was custom made for you.
So Binnall you came through Go Rightly.
Through Go Rightly, indeed. Yeah, and then we ended up going to show, it was actually a pretty weird screening. We went to show an earlier cut of this film at the crypto conference at the Lawrence conference in Portland last year, and it was awesome that we got to do it. But honestly, we were showing Seth was showing Terror in the Skies.
Seth Breedlove.
Yeah, Seth Breedlove. And it was I think people appreciated it, but at least the crowd there, they wanted tracks. They were like, why are we watching this, weird indie film? At least I'd say 95% of them. Lauren was awesome about letting us kind of do a test screening there, special premiere. But yeah, it was, it was a weird situation because I think people really were expecting it to be a documentary on mound culture or something like that. And when there was no Bigfoot, and there were no interviews, people had no idea what to do with it.
Yeah, I think also it was it came at the very, very end of a very long day, and it was it's hard to, at least for me, it was it's just hard to. True. After you've been there since 9 a.m. I think the movie started 7 or 8 at night. It was just really, it was just a long day.
It was a totally long day. It was just funny because at least for me, it was really I was oh, this was the wrong choice. We should have done something on the kindly wood ape Sasquatch.
I was really surprised and impressed with Adam Go Rightly.
If there's one thing that could happen from making this film, it would be that I would be really happy about. It would be Adam Go Rightly getting a film career as a Harry Dean Stanton style character actor.
Sure, yeah.
I did want to ask you because there is another element in this film, and this kind of is going to segue into the discussion of your other film. There's a very Lovecraftian element to this film as well.
Yeah.
So that's it's like you took a whole bunch of stuff, put it in a blender, and this film came out.
Well, my understanding is that the author, though, Leiber, is that how you say it? He was really influenced by Lovecraft.
He was, and Bill knows more about his relationship with Lovecraft, but they were in correspondence, and he wasn't really, Leiber wasn't part of that like crew, the like Bloch, Robert Bloch and not Robert Anton Wilson, Clark Ashton Smith and all those guys, the sort of Robert E. Howard. But he was corresponding with Lovecraft, and I think like the similarities that I would say between the two of them are very much in sort of their approach to the unnatural being rooted in this sort of pulp style. And I mean that in like not as a derogatory thing, like, this is where we get some of the best, paranormal fiction of our time is from the pulps. And I think later in life, one of the last pieces that Leiber wrote it started out as a serialized story called, what was it called? Like the Strange Brown Thing or something. It had a name like that, but it ended up being collected into this book called Our Lady of Darkness. And it's essentially like, I don't know if you guys read any sci-fi or fantasy authors like China Miéville or something like that. But there's this sort of like this current of new authors that are kind of like new weird authors that are very much working in the same space as like classic weird fiction. And this book, Our Lady of Darkness, was, basically what I'm trying to get at is that it was really ahead of its time in sort of kind of taking these Lovecraftian currents and updating them to what is essentially the 20th century city. So it ends up becoming, it's this like kind of urban fantasy novel almost, but they get into this idea of like geomancy for the cities and like the idea of a city, like an urban center, having this, sort of occult resonance to it. And there are sort of these Lovecraftian currents that go in there. And yeah, so he's, I wouldn't say that he was working specifically in that same sort of like cosmic horror milieu as Lovecraft in particular, but there was crossover beyond their conversations with one another, and that definitely is coming through in the whole just because that's like part of me as a storyteller, and Bill too, but especially me. That was like I can never get that early influence of Lovecraft out of my system, because I think it was reading it whenever I was an early reader, and my parents let me read a lot of kind of whatever I wanted. So like I remember picking up like when I was like 12, like stuff like Dracula, like Bram Stoker's original Dracula, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and Lovecraft stuff. And I mean, I'm still trying to get that feeling, or recreate as a filmmaker that feeling that I got when I first read Lovecraft, that like the spookiness of it, his expression of cosmic horror. Yeah.
Those elements in an urban setting, I think, are being really well articulated right now across the pond by the folk horror revival folks.
Yes,
they've got the series of these two books, Urban Weird, Volume 1 and 2. They're really great. You should check them out.
I have heard of those, and I have not looked them at. Yeah, that's totally coming from the same place. Absolutely. Yep.
And so that kind of brings us to almost like pre-Lovecraft, your other film that I got to watch yesterday, which is called Corpse.
Yes, and that is also available for anybody that wants to watch it on Prime. I would suggest, I think it is one of the few reviews that it's had, as the reviewer said, boil up some mushroom tea and enjoy the art school vibes. And I'll take that. This film, it's been around for a while, and that like I started to produce it in like 2015. No, earlier than that. I'm sorry, 2013. So it's been like a long time in the making. It was essentially it was probably like the first big project that I did out of grad school, and I think that to some degree you can kind of tell that because my mind was still in this very how do you describe it? I don't want to say like masturbatory, but it's a little wanky space where like completely with one's head in the clouds, kind of just thinking about stuff and, not really thinking about how it's going to come across at the very end.
Just personal.
Personal in that sense. That being said, it was this essentially, like, I wanted to take The King in Yellow, which is, I would consider, a modern myth, and I wanted to try to take that and work with that to not necessarily build or create new myths, but to use that as like a materia for engagement in like the collective world building that cosmic horror has sort of become over the past century. But at the same time, I also wanted to use an experiment with this idea that I had of kind of mashing up or creating this alchemy between experimental film practices, particularly ones that came from structural materialist film techniques. It was a school in the late 60s. I studied with a couple of guys that were sort of famous from there. That and magical techniques. So in particular, techniques that would come more from, I would say, like the Peter Carroll chaos magic, the sort of that revival, the UK revival of chaos magic in like the 90s, 70s through the 90s. So Ramsey Dukes, Pete Carroll, Phil Hine, sort of building on some of the practices that they had. And this is something that I started coming up with when I was in grad school. I studied with this guy, Tony Conrad, who is... you can look him up. Some people know him. He was this artist that was like he was a contemporary of Warhol, and he's probably most famous for his music. He is one of the first minimalist musicians, composers. He was doing stuff with like Lamont, Lamont Young, and he was involved with the He claims he gave the Velvet Underground their name. I think there might be some corroboration of that on the internet somewhere, that it was like an S&M book that Tony had at his apartment. But anyway, he's from that scene. He's just really, he passed away. He's just a really weird sort of artist. You can find some documentaries on him and stuff. And he had, he was part of what ended up becoming the structural film movement, and a lot of the stuff they were doing I found to be very similar, at least in the way that it approaches trying to create something that chaos magic does, where you're essentially trying to create something that acts as a you're trying to give form in either a glyph or a sigil, or whatever it is that you're creating, a sigil or a mantra or something like that, that you're trying to you, through symbolic thinking, create a visual representation of a desire or a thought or something like that, and then you are charging it in some way, and you are trying to sort of forget about it and let it do its automated sort of tasks. And the structuralist filmmakers, and Tony, even though he wouldn't really identify as a structuralist, he was they're very interested in very similar things, in that they wanted to create these film pieces that were not about anything, and that like formally, like you wouldn't look at them and they're not a story or anything, but yet they are still representing an emotion or a concept or a thought.
Yeah, it's almost like it takes the viewer along for a ride.
Yeah, and
So
Tony made this. Yeah, Tony made this film called The Flicker, which essentially it was alternating black and white frames, and this was like really revolutionary for when it came out.
Hope no one was epileptic.
Right, exactly. Well, that's what he was trying to. He was trying to create. Like essentially, he was trying to put the audience in a hypnagogic state, is what he was trying to do. I mean, he would not pull any punches talking about that. But like the idea, it was very similar. So I found some similarities between those, and it's something that I wanted to try out. And I'm being long-winded here. It's something I wanted to try out with Corpse. So essentially, we took this story of the King in Yellow, Bill and I, and we came up with all these different sort of methods in order to build up the script and the characters and the way that the film was going to be produced and stuff like that, that were based upon these different processes that I kind of custom made, that were a blend of essentially chaos magic and structuralist filmmaking. So I was using a lot of things like, using the tarot and the I Ching, sort of divinatory methods, automating the ways in which we sort of adapted different things from the films. I also set up this whole sort of blind process with the actors where they didn't know what else was going on in the story besides their own lines, which is not an uncommon thing for some directors to do, but I was trying to do it in this way that I really wanted them to sort of be contributing to the whole, but not have an understanding of it. And there are these, sort of processes that I had them go through in terms of like focusing and meditation and stuff like that. And there are these particular, like I would give them prompts and things to look at before they would perform. So, a lot of that ends up being, I don't want to say lost in the final piece. I mean, you see the final result there, but obviously the process isn't something that unless you're reading, a thesis next to it, you'll know what's going on. But it really was, equally a process-based thing, as well as like making a film, the final result. And it also was this sort of end of this like track that I had doing these types of films. Anyway, so yeah.
Well, can you kind of describe, because you said something there and I wanted to get you kind of expound on. It's the idea of the Robert Chambers, the King in Yellow being a modern myth.
Right. Yes.
And I'm a little, I've never read it, but I kind of am a little familiar with it, mostly because of True Detective, the first season of True Detective.
Sure, for sure.
The King in Yellow, the Yellow King, and the Carcosa, and Walter Bosley wrote a book about that, going back to Bosley's come up again in this episode, but he wrote a book about Ambrose Bierce and Destination Carcosa, and kind of like this idea that, like, Bierce is kind of, or Chambers is kind of like this go between the gothic horror of Bierce and kind of the more modern horror of like Lovecraft. In a sense.
And he's totally right. And this, it was funny because we started putting corpse together before True Detective came out. And I mean, they did a very different thing with it, which was cool. But yeah, that it started like popping up as soon as we decided to do this. And I have read Walter's book, and he's completely working in a similar space that we were thinking about this. So yeah, Robert Chambers. So if anybody that doesn't know, The King in Yellow was an anthology that was published in 1895, and it essentially is a series of stories that are all based around or involve references to this cursed text, which is a play called The King in Yellow, and in it they refer to things like Carcosa and Hyades and all these names that have since been incorporated into the Lovecraftian mythos. And in the anthology series, in the stories that are within The King in Yellow, when people read this book, they sort of go mad. And a lot of the sort of themes that are involved in it are, based around sort of like, not, I don't want to say like karmic debt or something, like, you do something at one point and it always catches up with you, like the devil always catches up with you type thing. Anyway, that is the book that Robert Chambers created, and it really is, from a literary standpoint, considered one of the first like weird fiction that's working in that space of this sort of interstitial fiction that, like Walter says, takes from Gothic horror and then sort of brings it into this more modern space. But it also is, I won't say the first instance, but I think an important instance of that mythos sharing that you ended up seeing amongst the Lovecraftian writers, and then since then, how that's grown, where Robert Chambers was, he took the King in Yellow, this the idea of this cursed text actually came from Ambrose Bierce, who used it earlier. So this is something that he borrowed from Bierce and created, sort of worked it in as a part of his own mythos, added this sort of weird spin to it, and it ended up being like kind of a kernel. I don't want to say catalyst, but it certainly was something that was one of the primary, I think, drivers behind Lovecraft and everything that came after him. And the fact that the King in Yellow and Hastur and the yellow sign has become sort of, part and parcel of the larger, Cthulhu, Nyarlathotep, Yog-Sothoth, Azathoth, all of these different sort of creatures and entities, really I found to be interesting, and I wanted, to sort of use this because I felt like it had become something that was, a story that was greater than itself. It had sort of already like transmuted in from simply being a book to being a concept. And since I was working in this space that really is, trying to essentially create symbolic representations of concepts, and those concepts being cosmic horror and nihilism and apocalypse and the end of the world and all that stuff, made sense to do it in that way. Yeah.
When you were really, almost doing some of these films as, I guess, just you could just call it a magical working, and charging them and incorporating all these different elements. Do you have any strange occurrences that happened around them?
Yeah. I mean, I do. Most of my strange occurrences are not overt, but right. I would say it's like, I mean, you know it when it happens. Like if you're sort of in that liminal space and the synchronicities are flying. Yeah, absolutely. And this film did. Corpse in particular. I mean, The Hill and the Hole coincided definitely with, important points in my life, but not in the same way that, Corpse did, and that it was, there were a lot of things that were going on in my life at the time. Just, normal physical stuff like this was, my wife was pregnant when we were doing this. We were moving to another house, another apartment. We were living in Brooklyn at the time. I was really dissatisfied with my job. I became completely disillusioned with the industry. I was working at MTV at the time. I mean, I could talk for a long time about the archonic nature of working for a major media corporation, which still terrifies me to this day. But, oh my God. That killed a part of me. So I was really dissatisfied with that. And I'd actually started to, while I had been up to that point very interested in the occult and everything Fortean from sort of an academic research perspective, it wasn't, and very much so, especially in grad school too, is when I started incorporating these ideas of like, chaos magic and stuff like that. But it was all very much in the background, and I started really bringing it to the front in sort of my personal life too. And it's all also happened after I had all of this, like, starting Corpse, which essentially started, I would say, like January 2015. In December of 2014, I had a very intense experience. I'm talking to Soraya. I'm pretty sure it was a sort of Kundalini type experience where I essentially energy shot from the base of my spine all the way through the top of my head, and for indefinite period of time I was floating out of my body, out of body experience, watching myself, and then I got sucked back in, and all of this stuff started happening. That happened to me in December 2014, and all of this started to work on Corpse after that, and while I was working on it, there were several, over, since, I guess at this point, I'm sorry, 2013, since that point, it had been, I'm trying to think, I'm sorry, 2013, I'm getting my years mixed up, so 2012, 2013, so yeah, this started in January of 2013, and essentially for like the 9 years since then, probably stopping about a couple years ago, it seemed to me like I was on a very, very, what would be a good way to describe it? I was being pushed in certain directions by synchronous forces in a way that I was unable to deny, and I was unable to resist.
You entered Chapel Perilous.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So it was very much. Yeah. It was very much a Robert Anton Wilson, period of my life, in the way that, I think we all recognize Cosmic Trigger as being, it's like a personal narrative. I mean, that's the only way you can, for whatever it influences you and whatever you get out of it, you can only take it as being this, like, this was completely an internal, this was Robert Anton Wilson's journey. And, he does a very good job of describing it in a way that we can sort of wrap our heads around it, but we would never understand it were we not him, Yeah.
Well, and going back to Hill in the Hole, in the protagonist, Tom Digby, you kind of have this idea of, supernatural things helping him along the way.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, completely. No, he's, from the very beginning, he's sort of on his strings are being pulled. We actually had a scene that we cut that was, and God, I forget what it was. It was a scene with him essentially getting fired from the Bureau of Land Management, and it was happening in real time. And then we sort of saw him, he kind of falls into, he gets a phone call and these sort of things start lining up. Anyway, it was too long exposition wise, but that was what we were thinking about trying to set. I mean, that was definitely something we were thinking about and trying to set up this idea. I mean, that's like a movie trope that I love, this idea of like the hero that doesn't necessarily get called to adventure, but falls into it. It's like my favorite Scorsese film is After Hours. That kind. I don't know if you have seen that Scorsese film. If you haven't, you should totally watch it. It's awesome. It's
that's one of his least known, but that is one I'd like to see.
Yeah. It's basically about, it's like Griffin Dunn having this crazy surreal like Lynchian nightmare in like Soho in New York in the 80s. It's great. Yeah.
What because I wanted to ask you what you kind of like your influences were, but like what other filmmakers do you think that are really heavily that are like making films now currently that are really influenced by occult themes?
Man, I don't know if there are as many like prominent filmmakers. I mean, you have the people like, Ari Aster, who's doing all of these, and I really wouldn't, I mean, and I don't mean to do this, I don't mean to sound like I'm scolding him for not properly, representing the grimoires, but I get the feeling that, like, it's just material for him, like he has no interest in it, but I could be wrong about that. I mean, obviously, there's the, like, for people that have seen Hereditary, his breakout film, it has a lot to do with demonology, and the demon Paimon is a big part of it. And anybody who knows anything about ceremonial magic, could get Ren on here, and he could tell you who Paimon actually is as a demon, completely different from sort of how it's represented in this like Rosemary's Baby kind of gory way. But yeah, Harry Astor, I don't think he is as much. I don't know if there are any contemporary filmmakers that are necessarily, and I'm probably like leaving out a bunch, and people please, contact me and correct me, tell me who you are, because I'm obviously, lacking in knowing about people who are doing this.
Well, what about Lynch?
Right. So those are the people that I think are doing this. Basically, I'm saying I'm sure there are a lot of young filmmakers out there that are doing cool stuff that I don't know about because I'm a dumb older man. So you have people like Lynch. Yes, Lynch is absolutely. He was the person I was going to mention next. Lynch is, my biggest influence, I would say, very much in the same way that, reading Lovecraft gave me this feeling that I can't that I'm still trying to recreate. Same thing happened to me when I first saw Twin Peaks, the series on TV. And I think he completely is working. I mean, he's like, essentially Twin Peaks season 3 is like Kenneth Grant fan fiction. Like it's completely he's talking about all, and whether or not that's Mark Frost or that's David Lynch, I don't know. I have a feeling it actually might be Mark Frost who's sort of trying to put a lot of this. If you've ever read The Secret History of Twin Peaks, the book that goes along with that, he pulls in a very Kenneth Grant, Alan Greenfield type way, pulls in all of these different currents and creates this like uber narrative, like Adam Curtis, everything is connected type thing, where it's everything from like Nixon to Lewis and Clark are involved in the Black Lodge and this whole thing, and it really ends up being very much reminding me of kind of that like sprawling the sprawling uber meta narrative that Kenneth Grant kind of does. And I don't know if that's David Lynch it's funny because David Lynch also has the TM side to things, and I have a particular I was raised, and I could probably do an entire show. I probably should do an entire show talking about this figure that was the central figure in the cult sect, new religious movement that my parents were involved in, that I was part of, which is the Meher Baba movement. And most of what you find about him is just like sort of 60s hippie guru stuff, but much like Gurdjieff and others, he has a interesting past. But anyway, all of that, all of these larger sort of I think everything is connected type narratives, at least for me, I think that, and maybe I'm getting a little bit off topic here, but for me at least, my interest is not only in that I feel like there are ways to make these connections, tools you can use, Lauren Coleman Twilight language, or the New Aeon Kabbalah, alphabet or whatever, if you're trying to sort of parse these things out. I am interested in the whether you call it Fordian approach in trying to see where these connections are happening, and whether or not it's something that can end up having some sort of re-representable basis in material. I don't know. Soraya and I were talking at one point, Soraya from Where the Row Go, about how difficult it is to represent the supernatural in like reality television, or represent experience. But for me, it's still like in the same way that like I'm trying to, recreate how David Lynch made me feel or Lovecraft made me feel. I'm trying to recreate these things that are essentially experiential, subjective stuff. And I think that a lot of the filmmakers that are working in the occult space, like Lynch, to come back to what I was talking about in terms of TM, I do think that TM's got some, in terms of it being a movement and a cult to some degree, there are some things that are problematic about it. But the essentials that he's talking about, which are meditative yogic practice, that's going to tap you into something that essentially is the occult, as far as I'm concerned. And so I think that, whether or not it's Mark Frost that's writing the stuff or David Lynch, he is one of the people that's representing that, that kind of stuff. I also think more recently, and I know that Red Pill Junkie did a great article on this in Daily Grail, but Duncan Trussell's if anybody doesn't know him, Duncan Trussell does a podcast, and he's a comedian, but he was also a follower of Ram Dass, and he's sort of this esoteric dude, and he did this really cool animated piece with the guy who does I forget his name, who animates Adventure Time, where essentially they took like Duncan Trussell's interviews from his podcast with people like Damien Eccles or Jason Louv, and say what you want about the people. They're interesting conversations about the kind of stuff that we're talking about, and essentially the animator makes these crazy, like hyper psychedelic, weird sci-fi, multi-genre freak out animations that go along with it. And if you haven't checked it out, I definitely suggest people do. It's on Netflix, and it's like a half-hour show. And I think that's kind of working in that, I don't want to say it's an occult space, but it's definitely in a place where the engagement with like consciousness or the standpoint from which they're approaching reality is not the one that most people in the world are. Yeah.
Right, and I think the way a lot of those directors you mentioned do, and the way that you do, represent the phenomenon or whatever it is that you present what's around it, and that's creating atmosphere, and that's I guess in the Alien kind of way, the first Alien movie, the mystery itself, that Lovecraftian language or feeling and atmosphere. That's the way to do it, not do crazy CGI monsters or whatever. So I think you did a really good job with that. A lot of people are mining this material. And it's going to be weird because I think a lot of the material that's closer to our hearts, is maybe less known stuff is really going to be mined. I think we can see that in like Stranger Things with the Montauk stuff and everything. But, everyone will be able to see how deep you guys are actually into this stuff and how much respect is like paid back to, how many nods there is. And I think that's real important, and people will definitely appreciate it.
I think that does come through. I mean, like, even with somebody like Lynch or, that's established, I think that like, wherever it's coming from, you can see when that sort of the sincerity comes through in that sense. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not so exploitative.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, you're going to get I think it always comes in this sort of like, that's the trickster for you, is that if these things are going to come up in conversation, you're going to get the other side of it, which ends up being, like the Stranger Things. And I mean, I enjoyed the first couple seasons, but at some point it ended. Yeah. Like at some point, I want to say with the last season, it ended up feeling a little bit like they were just doing like, it was like nostalgia for nostalgia's sake. It stopped being about, it was
pure
like,
simulacrum.
we're going to show you, what the old Big Mac bucks looked like. Remember this? Whereas in the first season, it was still like they were still thinking about Montauk and all of that stuff. I mean, I all of this is ripe for representing stuff. Oh, this is what I was going to say, is that I think that what you were saying, Surfiel, about how showing around, or like in Alien is a perfect example. It's like a pitch perfect movie. I love that film so much. And I think that, one of the things that actually I presented a academic paper on this, one of the few that get accepted because of how weird they are, on how, David Lynch's representation of the supernatural, I essentially think, whether or not he's intending to do this, he's representing it in terms of like a mirror experience, in terms of why am I forgetting the name completely? In terms of God, I'm forgetting the phrase. I'm going to sound like such an idiot here. Mike Cleland, Owls,
the Messengers.
Yeah, no, but what's that? What's the name for when
screen memory?
Screen memory. Yeah. Oh my God. Shoot me. Why did I forget that? Screen memory. And that, so essentially saying that like in film, I think that some of the best depictions of the supernatural are when you think of it from the standpoint of screen memory, in that, and particularly the way that screen memory is, dissected and represented and talked about in occult, paranormal, UFO circles. I think that that's, whether or not you want to call it like shooting sort of around the scariness or what, or, the whole don't show the monster, it's scarier that way thing. I think you can also look at it from the standpoint of screen memory too. And that, in particular with like the weird sort of effects that Lynch used in season 3 of Twin Peaks, I feel like, and if he's not doing it, then I think it's the right way to do it, and I'm going to do it, is that like representing the supernatural through this way that doesn't look, it's not like CGI reality. There's something that's, you're using artistic expression, you're using like some sort of like, re-representation of it, and couching that within the idea of like screen memory, not necessarily being screen memory that is, programmed upon you as a, test subject, because I'm not talking nuts and bolts, but I mean screen memory in terms of what you are seeing is either something that you do not have the senses to process, so you're seeing it as something different.
Your mind is trying to grasp it, so
right.
it's using its heuristics to put something together, like a dream
Exactly.
logic kind of thing.
Exactly. Or the idea that what is being seen is some sort of like avataric representation of something that exists in a non-physical plane that is using the material that exists in the physical plane. So all these different ways of sort of looking at the screen memory that aren't like nuts and bolts, I think are really good ways of representing the experience, or I think there are better ways of representing the experience. For me, at least, I find them to be more effective in a cinematic sense, and that's what I appreciate about some of these filmmakers. I think that are working from that point of sincerity. Is I think you'll find most of them are using something that is not necessarily exactly a screen memory approach, but they are looking at it, like an Alien. You're not showing it, even if it's as simple as using that method.
Well, let me ask you this, Chris. It's kind of the time that we have left, and Tim, I want your input on this too. It's like anything that you see, like, because you said that you used to work for MTV, because you're kind of like a former television guy.
Yeah.
And is there anything that you see as far as like the paranormal television series or shows that may, or reality stuff that may kind of give you hope that they're good, that things are going in the right direction? And it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's like a network thing. Yeah.
No, I mean, and I've stated this on record before. I honestly did not I couldn't get into Hellier. It wasn't something that really drew me in, and I did try to watch it a couple of times. The methodology by which they are, Newkirks are going about doing it, the sort of community DIY punk rock, baseline from which they're working, the engagement with the material, and I know there are some criticism that's lobbed in the social media universe upon how they've presented themselves and how they've engaged with magic or synchromysticism or whatever, but all of that aside, because I think a lot of that is opinion, I think that everything about the project is everything that I want to see happening more and more. And I mean, this is coming from a guy, for me at least, like before I was doing film, I was doing music, and I was like all about the DC hardcore scene when I was in high school, and Discord Records, and
right on.
Do it yourself, like you do it yourself.
That's a big influence on me too.
Yeah, it's huge. And I've been lucky enough to I played in a band with I live in Baltimore, and so I'm kind of friends with some of those guys now, and it's still something that I try to inject into everything that I do, particularly filmmaking. So when I see something like the way that the New Turks have done Hellier, I'm all about that. Even if it's not something that like I can get into, and I feel like I'm deficient because everybody has really like loved it in an entertaining way, or it's spoken to them in some sort of like deeper synchromystic way, like Ren was talking about. And it didn't hit me in any of those ways. I thought it was cool and well done. It just, I ended up watching something else after I tried a few episodes in both seasons. And maybe I'll approach it again. But everything else that has been, involved, like even the way that they present the stuff, I like. But I just, I have to be honest. I don't want to be a jerk.
Tim, what about you, man?
I really don't watch any paranormal TV, but I like the Hellier stuff. I think that's really good. Seth Breedlove's doing some good stuff.
Yeah, Seth. Should mention Seth too. Absolutely. I think Seth is doing some cool stuff. I'm excited.
He's really
to see
innovative.
more.
He's trying different stuff each time, which I really respect and appreciate.
And talking to him too, like he's definitely like he's a DIY guy also, and I really respect that, and he really wants to keep that. I think I heard him like the last couple interviews I heard, he was even talking about that too. So I hope he continues.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So he's I like a lot of his stuff, and him and Hellier are the only two that I really pay any attention to. Most of the other stuff is pretty cookie cutter stuff, like on basic cable and shit like that.
Yeah. I think it's just going that direction now as the technology gets cheaper. People are able to do their own stuff. I mean, we talked to Seth not that long ago, and we talked about, I think Minerva Monster was the first one that he made, and he talked about how it was pretty much a shoestring budget. It was pretty much learn as you go, and he's a little embarrassed by it now, but it was a learning experience for him, and now he's become one of the most well-known in that field.
Yeah, he's done a great job.
The cooler DIY underground stuff is like the good music.
Oh yeah.
So the same's going to be now that the means of making this type of content is so much more democratized. It's going to be the same when people graduate. We were talking about the mysteries of the unknown books. That's where you start when you're a kid, and there's nothing wrong with being like a teenager and have your first little Punkorama tape, but you get a little more refined taste, and that's kind of how we feel we are with the podcast. When people need more, they need a little more substance. You just start going underground and finding all these people creating all this great stuff.
Oh, definitely. And it's always like, the smaller, the scenes that organically build, I couldn't have told you, 3 years ago that I would necessarily be, kind of involved with the scene that, you and Soraya and, Tim and Go Rightly. But it's one of these things that just when they come together, and that's when you get the coolest music and art and films and all that stuff is when there is something that has been able to flourish on its own without the weight of the corporation. I mean, I'm beyond my personal feelings about having worked at a corporation. Yeah, I'm vehemently anti-corporation. The killers of creativity, and I can tell you that from first-hand perspective. Because it's you would not believe the hoops that they go through to make everything terrible.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. This has been awesome.
This has been great. Thanks so much for having me on, guys.
Yeah, please. Well, first, actually, Tim, you've been doing Binnall of America again, right?
Yeah. We'll be back Friday with Lauren Coleman, 9 p.m.
Awesome! Awesome! I'm so excited.
Good.
Yeah.
I'll be listening live.
I'll have a lot more to say on that show than I did on this one. Don't worry about it.
I'm sorry. I completely.
It's all good. It's not
all right.
But also to mention that Tim will be joining us, at least not physically, but online this year for Strange Realities 2020, because we're going to be doing it online. And I think by the time this is actually out, we'll actually have an announcement on that. So
yeah,
excellent. I can attend then.
Yeah, it should be fun.
Yeah. You can attend. Everybody can attend. And so, Chris, tell everybody where they can find your stuff, where they can find Hill in the Hole, where they can find Corpse,
Absolutely.
all that good material.
Yeah, so you can either go to brightrectangle.com and the links are there, or just go to Amazon Prime, and you can, if you're a member Prime, it's free. Both of them are free, and just search for the Corpse or the Hill in the Hole. You can watch those there. And I'm sometimes on Twitter at the Chris Ernst, but who wants to go there these days?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I know. That's very, very true. All right, guys. Thank you so much for both of you for being with us. And guys, stay on the line. We are going to close out this section, and we'll be back on Conspirinormal. Welcome back, guys, to Conspirinormal. That was a very interesting interview with Chris Ernst, and we got to also talk to really the star of the film, if you want my opinion, Tim Binnall, playing the Fry guy in the film.
Fryer technician.
Yeah, Fryer technician. I really enjoyed the interview that we did with Chris. It was interesting to kind of get his ideas, kind of like, as a kind of like an occult filmmaker.
Yeah,
was kind of interesting. There's definitely that aspect to that film. Mm-hmm. And if you guys watch it, you'll kind of see what we're talking about. But I really like the film, not just because there's people that I know in it, which kind of helps. It was kind of made it a little more amusing to me, but it was very interesting, and it's really up our alley as far as like the different kinds of material that it talks about. So, what were your thoughts on it? Because I think you've actually watched it twice now.
Yeah, I really like it a lot. It's got all that kind of weird Americana that I'm really into, and it has we talked about the atmosphere, and that's the number one quality I usually look for in movies, especially like ones with a darker edge, or ones that are have a high weirdness to them. But I was really impressed, and it was a great conversation. We share a lot in common with all these kind of currents that we're into, and it was really great, man.
Is there anything that you don't have to give away? No spoilers or anything, but like, just you can tell me, was there anything that you noticed from watching it a second time when you're not having to like kind of, because usually with films, when you're not having to watch the plot or kind of figure out the plot, and you can watch it a second time, you will get something that you didn't get before. So was there anything that you noticed in it? Because I haven't watched it. Yeah,
well, we talked about that there's this like underlying down nerdian theme to it.
Yeah.
And to not give it away, I'll just say that. So
right.
If you're well versed in that, then you can definitely you'll definitely probably get that. That happened the second time, yeah.
Okay. So that was something that you noticed more the second time than you watched it the first. Okay.
Right. And I want to say I was a big fan of that Mandate 33 stuff, which is where this YouTube series where Bill Darman and some other people, they go along the 33rd parallel to some of these sites, and to some of these sites listed in Weird America. And that I was a big fan of that, and from like following that is when I first started seeing like things on social media about them. I think when they were doing their fundraising for it, them working on a movie, so I already knew like, okay, this is guys that are like really into these currents and streams we're pretty deep into, so this is going to be cool. I already knew it was going to be pretty cool.
Okay. I'm gonna have to check that out, and we should think about getting those guys on.
Yeah, they seem to really be into that stuff, and this movie, I think for Conspirinormal listeners, I think they'll really like it.
All right, yeah, guys, just the normal stuff. We're gonna close out the show, but Patreon is there. Should have something up. We have started. By the point that this is actually going to get released, we have started to release the videos from Strange Realities 2019. And this is the footage that we took last year. And that's going to be for our Patreons for now. We've got some other ideas that we want to do with that. And that's because we are promoting Strange Realities 2020, which you guys, by the time this is posted, you'll have already heard us talk about that on a separate mini episode. But we are promoting that as an online only event simply because we don't know what's going to happen in the world and we want to be safe. And so we want to, so there will be information about that. So check that out as well. But Patreon, you can join for $1. And YouTube is up. We're over 1,000 subscribers now. Check us out on Conspirinormal Podcast. And also, leave us a good review. We've gotten a couple. We've gotten a few from people. And we really appreciate those good 5-star reviews, guys. So thanks so much. All right. I think that's it. Unless there's anything that you wanted to add.
Let's wrap it up.
All right, brother. So join us next time, guys, for more paranormal weirdness on Conspirinormal.
If you would like to help the show, please consider becoming a Patreon at www.patreon.com/conspirinormal or leave a one-time donation at conspirinormal.com. And please check out our YouTube channel, Conspirinormal Podcast.